Resolve Sayyid al-Shuhada is actually a means for us to come out of the darkness towards Noor. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Ayat al-Kursi says that He is the master of those, the guardian of those who believe. يُخْرِجُهُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. He takes them out of shades of darkness towards light. And the Prophet also has been described in the same way in the Quran. And for us, the words of the Prophet where he says, Husaynun minni, is an extension of that process. That Husayn ibn Ali and the Azaf Husayn ibn Ali also plays the same role of taking people out of darkness towards Nur. We've been looking at different themes during these Majlis, and tonight, as you see in the list which was circulated earlier, we will be talking about the women in Karbala. But before that, I would like to go a little bit back in history, just try to connect the Islamic era with the dawn of humanity.
Thank you.
But when we look at the history of humanity, we know that it's actually a stage where you have this struggle between Adam alayhi salam and Shaitan. Adam alayhi salam basically is representing the good forces, and Shaitan is representing the evil forces. And this has basically continued, this struggle has continued from day one, going all the way to the era of the prophets, coming to the time of our Prophet. And this struggle basically reached to its peak in Karbala. And therefore after Karbala, the tragedy of Imam Hussain alayhi salam has become the light and the beacon for us to know what has happened, what is batil, what is truth, and what is false. When we look at the role of women in history from the Islamic point of view, we see that you can't talk about humanity just by talking about Adam. You must include the story of Hawa. And then we go on further. But let me just digress slightly here, since some of these issues are not commonly discussed. When we look at the story of Adam and Hawa, in many other scriptures, even if you look at the story in the Bible and compare that with the Quran, you might see the names are similar, the events seem to be similar, but there are differences, fundamental differences in how Quran talks about certain events compared to, for example, the Bible. If you look at the Bible, for example, or other scriptures also, Shaitan could not influence Adam directly. According to their version, he comes to Hawa, tempts her, and then, Hawa is basically tempting Adam to disobey the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So right from the very beginning, the poor woman becomes the source of the misguidance of human beings. If you look at the whole story in the Quran, you will see that, and that is the beauty of the Arabic language. In Arabic language, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about Adam and Hawa, there is not a single indication in any ayat which says that Shaitan approached Hawa and through Hawa approached Adam. Everywhere, he approached both of them. And the beauty of Arabic language is that when you talk about pronouns, in Arabic you have singular, dual, and then you have plural. Unlike English or Farsi or Urdu, when you talk about singular and plural. But in Arabic you have singular, then dual, and then you have plural. Everywhere when you see the story of Adam and Hawa, you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing both of them on a dual tense. Just one example in Surah number 7, ayat 19 to 22, 4 ayat. I have counted more than 25 dual tenses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used. Just very quickly. Ya Adam uskun anta wa zawjuka al-jannah, O Adam, you and your wife, live here, be my guest, there's no hurry to go to dunya. Stay here in this garden. فَكُلَا مِنْ حَيْثُ شِئْتُمَا. It's in dual. Both of you eat whatever you want from here. وَلَا تَقْرَبَا. Command is also for both of them. Both of you do not go near this tree which is forbidden. فَوَسْوَسَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانِ. لَهُمَا dual. Shaitan is the one who approached both of them. Not Hawa and then, through Hawa, Adam. And then, وَقَالَ مَا نَهَاكُمَا رَبُّكُمَا. He talks to them and he says, what is for, your Lord. That also is in dual, Rabbukuma. The Lord of both of you has forbidden you from this tree, because if you eat the fruit, you will become like malak, like angels, and you will live forever. وَقَاسَمَهُمَا. And Shaitan did qasam. Adam and Hawa never heard any qasam that was false. This is first time. It's Shaitan, using his, waswasa there. And so it goes on. And this is where we see that even at the end, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way rebukes them, وَنَادَاهُمْ رَبُّهُمْ. Allah then addressed both Adam and Hawa together. أَلَمْ أَنْهَاكُمَا عَنْ تِلْكُمْ الشَّجَرَةِ. Did I forbid both of you from this tree? Did I say لَكُمَا إِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ لَكُمَا عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ? The shaitan is the enemy of both of you. And so we see in Quran there is no indication at all that in this first, what I call controlled test run for Adam and his children. This is not in dunya. The Sharia has not yet come. Haram and wajib is not there. That's why we don't believe it was an issue of sin and guna. It was tarki awla. There's a whole discussion about it. But even in that controlled, test run situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows that both genders are equally responsible for their actions, and both can be approached by the shaitan to misguide them. Salawat.
نعرة تكبير نعرة رسالة يا رسول الله نعرة حيدري 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 اللهم صل على صلوات
So when we look at the history of the nations who came before Islam, you cannot only talk about men. You talk about Adam, you have to talk about Hawa. You talk about Ibrahim, you have to talk about Hajar. You talk about Musa alayhi salam, you have to talk about his mother and sister. When you talk about Isa alayhi salam, you can't talk about him without his mother. In Surah Tahrim, which is actually a surah related to family issues, family challenges, there, yes, Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings two negative, examples of the wives of Nuh and Lut, and actually even before that, two others. You know better than me, and there you see that even there Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then ends with the example of Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh, as a positive, example. And so when we look at even the example of Musa's mother, she's one of the few ones mentioned in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired her, how to put Musa in the river, with the promise that we will bring him back to him. And this is where we see that, when we talk about even the inspiration and ilham, this is possible even for a woman. Salawat. Maryam's status is known. There is a whole surah in the Quran, named after her, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about her as well as the birth of Isa ibn Maryam. And so coming to the Islamic era, Nobody can write the history of the Prophet, especially the Meccan era, without talking about the support and sacrifice of Khadija salawatullah. The Prophet had many wives later on, but there was no hadith which came similar to the one that the Prophet said, and it's unanimously accepted by both schools of thought, that Sayyidat Ahl-e-Jannah Arba. The chiefs of the women of Jannah are four: Maryam bint Imran, Fatima bint Muhammad, Khadija bint Khuwaylid, and Asiya bint Mazahir. Khadija has been mentioned there, and Fatima Zahra alayhi salam will also be mentioned there. No one can write the life of Ali without talking about the support that she received from Fatima, when he received from Fatima Zahra. You know, we sometimes do not realize that even the claim of Fadak was not for the sake of Fadak. There was a stepping stone for her to claim the Khilafat of Amir al-Mu'minin. And this is where we see that the first supporter of the Wilayat of Amir al-Mu'minin after Wafat of Rasulullah was Fatima Zahra salawatullah. And then you move on to the peak of the struggle between good and evil. You go to Karbala. Even in that incident, you will see, you can divide the events into two parts. The first part from Medina to Mecca to Karbala to the day of Ashura was led by Hussein ibn Ali. But the other part of the struggle from Karbala to Kufa to Damashq and back to Medina, this was led by Zainab bint Ali salawatullah. And that is why she is known truly as Sharikatul Hussein. And she was partner with Hussein in leading this struggle. Actually, I have a booklet on this explaining the historical context of the khutbah of Bibi Zainab in the Darbar of Yazid. It's available in English as well as in Urdu. Initially written in Urdu, and then I wrote it in English. And it is available, for free download. I think the website would be there in the broadcast system that you have. So when we talk about the history before Karbala, we see that you can not only talk about men. Women have been equally contributing silently, maybe behind the scenes, but their contribution is equally important for the development of the human society. Moving on to the main theme, the women in Karbala. Let me very quickly, acknowledge some of the names that we don't know. I think it's important to remember the women in Kufa. Taw'a, who gave refuge to Muslim bin Aqil. She is somebody who is praiseworthy because she knew that the husband and the son were with Ibn Ziyad. Yet she gave shelter to Muslim bin Aqil. And this really demands, quite a courage in that environment, in that society. And this is where we see that, even the old lady who gave refuge to the sons of Muslim bin Aqil, knowing that the son-in-law is actually looking for them because he was after this reward that Ibn Ziyad had said for bringing them. In Medina itself, Salama, al-Mu'mineen, her role also in supporting Hussein ibn Ali is very important. Actually, she became the custodian of the important documents that Imam Hussein alayhi salam left with her. That when my son comes back, you will convey them to him. And so and the Prophet had given her the bottle which had the sand of Karbala, with the prediction that the day this turns into blood, you should know that my grandson has been killed. And so she's part of this whole narration of Karbala. We cannot, ignore that. Al-Baneen, mother of Hazrat Abbas. You know, she not only was a mother of the Shuhada, 4 sons, but the way she would go regularly in Jannatul Baqi every day and sit down with the women of Banu Hashim and recite the Marsiyah, and that was not only mourning her own sons and other Shuhada of Karbala, it was actually a way of public protest against the massacre of Karbala. That we cannot ignore as far as their contribution is concerned. In Karbala itself, yes, we know about Bibi Zainab, we talk about her quite a lot, and indeed she has her own status. Nobody can deny, nobody can be equal to her among other women in Karbala. But her sister Kulthum cannot be forgotten. In supporting her older sister Zainab, she gave a very moving speech in Kufa, rebuking the people of Kufa for abandoning Hussein ibn Ali. Fatima bint al-Hussein, the oldest daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we don't talk about her much. She was married to Hassan Musanna, the older son of Imam Hassan. This is Fatima bint al-Hussein, married to Hassan Musanna, the older son of Imam Hassan Mushtaba, not Qasim, that's another story. And Hassan Musanna himself, basically, and she actually gave a very, she was one of those who also gave a very powerful speech in Kufa. Condemning the people of Kufa that you were the people who wrote to my father. And then when the time came, you basically, abandoned him. Her husband, Hassan Musanna, fought in Karbala. He was wounded severely, therefore he is dead actually. So they put him beside the body of the other Shuhada. It was only after the Shahadat of Hussein ibn Ali, where the Yazidi army were beating their drums of victory. That's where he gained consciousness. Got up, found a broken sword, picked it up to continue his fight. But then some of the soldiers who were from the tribe of his mother, they quickly surrounded him and took him away under their own protection. So he was not among the prisoners. But Fatima bint Hussein was there. And when you look at the descendants of Imam Hassan al-Mushtaba, the descendants of Imam Hassan al-Mushtaba all come from this couple. Hassan Musanna and Fatima bint Hussein. There is no any other line for the descendants of the Hassani Sa'ada. Salawat. But I would like to mention some examples tonight. This was just a general overview of the history of Karbala. Some of the examples are really worth mentioning and remembering. All of you know the name of Zuhair bin Qayyim. His role on the day of Ashura is very important. But how did he come to Imam Hussain alayhi salam? The caravan of Imam Hussain alayhi salam was coming from Makkah to Karbala. Actual destination was Kufa, but that was the route. Zuhair bin Qayyim also was coming with his own small group of his friends and relatives. He had his own position in Kufa as a respected individual, and he had played a very powerful role in some of the battles of conquest in the earlier time. And his caravan also was moving on the same direction, the same path. But somehow he was avoiding to meet Imam Hussain. Whenever they will stop in a manzil, for resting, he would purposely put his group, and their tents a little bit far away. Because he knew the situation going on those days, and he wanted to avoid it somehow. And Imam Hussain alayhi salam, in some of the narration that we have, he says to his companions, what has happened to Zuhair? Why is he not coming to see me? You see, Imam Noor actually looks for the cases where there is potential of guidance. If there is a potential, then Imam al-Nur will himself will come forward. The example of Hur. Imam ordered on that day to get extra water. He used his ilm al-ghayb because he knew Hur is coming. So Imam al-Nur will do whatever he can in order to bring about those who have the potential of guidance, closer to him. And so he used to ask to his companions, what is the matter? Eventually Imam decided in one of the stops, he sent a messenger. And the messenger reached to their main tent, where all of them were sitting down and having their meal. And he said, I am the messenger of Hussein ibn Ali, and he would like Zuhair to come and see him. As soon as they heard that this is the messenger of Hussein ibn Ali, all of them were in shock. Their hands were wherever it was at the time. There was total silence. Nobody said anything. Even Zuhair was silent. You know who broke the silence? It was the wife of Zuhair. She is the one, she addressed her husband. And she says, Subhanallah, يَبْعَثُ إِلَيْكَ إِبْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ فَلَا تُجِيبُهُ. She is the one who is actually now inciting the husband. SubhanAllah, the Hussein is sending his messenger to you and you're not going to respond. And so whatever fazilat that Zuhair bin Qayn has is because of the encouragement of Zuhair. We know Zuhair, we know his contribution, his shahadat, but do not forget that he moved in that direction by the urging of his wife. Salawat. He goes with the messenger to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. They have the private conversation. History doesn't say, even Zuhair doesn't mention anything. But the way he came back, his attitude had totally changed. He comes back, he says, I am going to join Hussein in sacrificing my life for him. It was not that Imam Hussein said, I'll give you governorship, wealth and house and this and that. The matter was very clear that we might end up being killed. And he comes there, he says, I am, separate my belongings. I'm going to join Hussein. And then he addresses his wife. He says, I don't want you to become a prisoner. I don't want you to suffer the status of being a widow. And therefore I'm divorcing you. And he asked his other relatives, take care of her until she reaches, Kufa at her home, and have made the provision for her. And so even that talaq was given not because of any negative. This is probably the only talaq I know in history, which was done with a positive sense that he didn't want to his wife to suffer in that way. And this is where we see, Ahl-e-Bait are they came with their women, and they were willing that not only they will give their lives, but they will even are willing that their women will suffer for the sake of survival of Islam. Salawat. So what was the response of Zuhair's wife? She turned around and she says, Allah guided you to make this choice. But she became the wasila for her. She was the one who urged her to go. And she says that, I don't question your decision about me. The only thing I ask of you is that on the day of Qiyamah, when you are with the grandson of Hussein, don't forget me. And this is where we have to realize that, Karbala is not only struggle of the man. Women also played a very powerful role in this struggle. Salawat. couple of years ago, there was a question, a controversy in Pakistan by a very prominent scholar there from our community, unfortunately, where he describes Zuhair bin Qayn as a Shia, a Sunni Shaheed of Karbala. And I think it's important for us to know what is the reality. Sometimes we would like to appease other people, their ways of doing it. Hussein has that magnetic power, even the Sunnis will come to Hussein. Even non-Muslims will appreciate the sacrifice of Hussein. You don't have to say that among the Shuhada of Karbala there was also a Sunni Shaheed, so that Sunnis will more be receptive to Azadari of Imam Hussein. He actually is misinformed, has not looked at history properly. Yes, before that meeting, Zuhair bin Qayn was something else. But after meeting Hussein bin Ali, he was someone else. And this is where we have to realize that, on the 9th of Mohram, when Shamir came down to Karbala, and Umar bin Asad wanted to start the hostilities, and Imam Hussein alayhi salam, sent Abbas with some companions to see, go and ask them what is the issue. And Umar bin Asad said that the command has come from Ibn Ziyad, either you give in or we'll fight. And so Abbas said, okay. He asked his companions to stay there. He said, I'll go back and convey the message to my brother. At that time, Habib was there, Zuhair bin Qayn was there in that group. And so they saw some of their fellow people from Kufa. Zuhair bin Qayn approached Urwa bin Qais, an army of Yazidi, officer of Yazidi army. And he basically tried to counsel him and advise him to join Hussein ibn Ali. At that time, Urwa says to Zuhair, Ya Zuhair, ما كنت عندنا من شيعة أهل هذا البيت. O Zuhair, as far as we know you were not a Shia of Ahl-e-Bait. إنما كنت عثمانيا. You had this Usmani trend. In those days, the people were not known as Shia Sunni. They used to say, this person has Uthmaniyul Hawa. His inclination is more with Usman and that ideology. Whereas others would be, Alawiyul Hawa. They are inclined towards Ali and his perspective. And so Zuhair Urwa says to Zuhair, you are known as Usmani. How come you were asking me to join Hussein? Look at his answer. He says, أَفَلَسْتَ تَسْتَدِلُّ بِمَوْقِفِي هَذَا أَنِّي مِنْهُمْ. And the narration is from Tabari, a famous historian of Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Zuhair says that my stand now, where I'm standing now, in the camp of Hussein, doesn't this prove to you what is my stand now? Don't look at my past. You don't judge the person about the past. You have to see what was at the end. And so the statement is very clear from Zuhair. He was Usmani ul Hawa, but at that time he became Husayni ul Hawa. And a Husayni is a Shia. On the day of Ashura, when Hussein ibn Ali divided his small group into three divisions, right flank, left one, and the center, he gave the command of the center to Abbas, and the right one to Habib, and the left flank of his army, of his caravan, the command was given to Zuhair. Sometimes this spiritual journey from Dhulumat to Nur is covered with the speed of light. If you are guided by Imam of light. When the Imam and Noor is pulling you, it doesn't take that. In just a few days, he was something else. Now he's becoming the commander of the left flank of Imam Hussein's army. And on that day, early morning, when Imam did Itmam Hujjat, talked to the Yazidi forces, even Habib talked to them. Zuhair also, being a prominent member of Kufa. See the way he talks to them. He says, Ya Ahl Kufa, Inna haqqan ala al-Muslim nasihatu akhihi al-Muslim. He says it is the duty of a Muslim to advise a fellow Muslim. وَنَحْنُ حَتَّى الْعَانِ أُخْوَةً. Till now we are brothers. He's saying to the Yazidi army. وَعَلَى دِينٍ وَاحِدٍ. On same faith. وَمِلَّةٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. مَا لَمْ يَقَى بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمُ السَّيْفِ. As long as our swords are not drawn, we are still Muslim brothers. And therefore I have this duty to counsel them. فَإِذَا وَقَعَ السَّيْفِ. But remember, when the swords are drawn, انقطعت العصمة. Then our relationship is broken. وَكُنَّ أُمَّةٌ وَأَنْتُمْ أُمَّةٌ. We will be followers of one religion and you will be the followers of another. This is Zuhair. Very clear words. And so to say that, Zuhair was a Sunni martyr on the day of Ashura, this is very ridiculous and away from the truth. Salawat. One more, example is of somebody who came from a Christian background. And I remember once I did the Ashura in UK, and there I saw this trend. Again, they are portraying Wahab al-Kalbi as a Christian martyr of Karbala. Very similar to this situation of Zuhair. And this is where we don't have to appease others by giving them the label in that way, which is not really factual. Wahab bin Hubab al-Kalbi, yes, he was a Christian. He came from a Christian background. His mother was a Christian. He had recently married. But somehow, along the way, they came to know about Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And it was the mother who actually encouraged his son that probably we should join Hussain in support. When you join Hussain, then they are no more Christians. They became Muslim. The historians are very clear. Aslama biyad al-Hussain. He became Muslim at the hand of Hussain ibn Ali. Don't call him by the old name now. He's no more a Christian, he's a Muslim. He's a Hussaini, he's a Shia. And this is where we see that, his mother was there also very much encouraging him to go and fight. And he goes. The battle that he had, he killed about 19 horsemen and 12 foot soldiers of Yazidi army until he was injured and his hands were cut, and then he was killed. When he was killed, his wife ran from the tent to his body, clearing the blood from his face. This is where Shimra Mal'un saw her, and he asked one of his slaves to attack her. The Mal'un came with a club and hit on her head, and she was killed right away. She is the only Shahida on the day of Ashura. And they come from the Christian background. But this is where you see the role of the mother and the wife in supporting this cause is something we have to appreciate and understand. Salawat. One more example before I go to the Masjid, although these are all Masjid. Whether I say it in English or Urdu, same. You know, we talk about the family of the Ahl-e-Bait. Look at the women who were among the Ashab. Some of the Ashab have come with their women. We still don't know definitely in history who was the Sahabi whose wife and child, a child who was in early teens on the day of Ashura. When the companion was killed, the wife turns to the son and she says, "Ukhruj ya bunayya wa qatil bayna ibn Rasulillah." "Oh my son, go forward and go and fight for the sake of the Prophet's grandson." So he comes to Imam Hussain alayhi salam because he'd been seen the whole day. Anyone who goes, first they go to Hussain to seek permission. So this boy who was still in early teens, he comes to Imam Hussain alayhi salam and asks permission to go and fight. And Imam looked at him. You know, there was a belt there, the sword hanging there, and Imam recognized him. He said, "Your father was just killed, you know, a short while before." And he says, "Yes." Then